Hello class, I'm going to go over a few ways that you can make your watermark. So let's start out with Illustrator here. Now Illustrator is independent of resolution until you make a final rasterized or pixel copy. So while it's in Illustrator itself, you don't have to worry about the size or resolution because it's represented by math. However, if you save a copy in something like JPEG or PNG, you do have to worry about resolution. So we can make a new document here. There's a few templates here. We just need something about the size of a watermark, so maybe 3 inches by 1 inch perhaps. If it's your signature, it will be longer than it is wide. So you can put those sizes in right here, or you can click on print. Now this should have a few settings that you can use, such as orientation here. We can change this to inches. Let's say we'll do about 3 inch by 1.5 to start. When we have a new document, we can hit Command negative to zoom out and Command plus to zoom in. There's a lot of useful keyboard shortcuts. Let's move this around here. Now in Illustrator on a Mac, you can go here to Preferences to change things like unit type if you want to have everything in inches. Guides, Smart Guides will show vertical and horizontal lines that help you place objects near each other. There's a lot of useful stuff in here. So most of that you would use would be under General or Type or Units. File, of course, has most of the things you need to make a new file, open a file, save as, save a copy if you want to make different versions. You can place artwork like a JPEG using this place command here. And that would allow you to put a picture in the background on a layer, lock that layer, and then draw over top of it if you were tracing something. Export, we have export for screens, which is geared towards doing size-specific things. Like let's say if you're gearing something towards the size of a smartphone or tablet. Or export as, will give you a bunch of options here where we can rename it, we can put tags in it for the Mac operating system, we can change what folder it goes in, we can change the format here. Now this is very important. Just remember that to have transparency in the background, it has to be a PNG or a TIFF or Photoshop if you had that option here. So what will happen if you save it as a JPEG is there's no transparency in JPEGs. So if your background looks white here, it will look white in the original that you put over top of your picture. So you'll have your design and then this white square around it. So make sure if you export, you save it as PNG or TIFF, or you're placing it directly as an Adobe Illustrator file into Photoshop. Now we have some other useful options here. Edit, you can do things like copy and paste. Object has to deal with object itself. As you make shapes, you can transform it here, you can group and ungroup, you can expand, which I'll talk about later. So all this stuff here, it will show you the shortcut keys right there. And then since this works with what we call paths using the pen tool, we have some options for that here. Type, of course, deals with typography. Select here lets you select things and arrange them. Effect, we're not going to use this for now, but there are effects. View, we have many options in here as far as fitting the artboard to window, for instance, Command 0, just like in Photoshop. Zooming in, zooming out. Hiding edges, we can put rulers on the edge, which can be handy. Now if you have rulers, that also allows you to drag out a guide horizontally or vertically. Now these will not print or be shown in the final file. These are just for you to help line things up. If you want to get rid of those, you can drag them off the screen or select one and hit delete. Okay, if we need to change the document setup, we can do that right there. Notice that while I'm on the black arrow there, we'll have that option. Or we could go up to File and we can do Document Setup there. If you change the color mode, that would happen right here. Now Windows has a few things in it that you will want to use. Appearance has some transparency options. Align will help you align objects to each other. Brushes can be handy. Color can be handy if you want a second color window up there as opposed to using that. Document info. But the most important things on here will be layers, Pathfinder, and stroke, as well as perhaps align. You'll see why this comes in handy. Let's go ahead and turn on align. Now I notice my transform and my align are in the same palette there, but you can move stuff out or in. You can move that outer back into a palette. Okay, Pathfinder there, I'm going to put in that palette as well. So those are all together with tabs. We have layers over here. We can move that. Now layers work sort of like Photoshop, but because Illustrator deals with objects, we don't have to worry about painting over top of something. If I make a square here with a certain color, and then I make a square with another color over it, we don't have to worry about one permanently getting rid of what was there in the other one. Because these are objects, I can move them around. Now, depending on how you use Illustrator, there's a few exceptions to that rule, but overall, things will function as objects. Now, we can still organize them in layers, and if you click this little accordion here, we can see individual parts of it. We can turn them off and on as far as visibility. This does not delete them, it just makes them visible or invisible, so you can see what you're working with. So if we were going to bring in a picture to trace, I would go ahead and go to File and Place, and it would let me select a picture there. And then I could place it and put it on a layer. I could lock that layer, and then I can make a new layer. You'll see new layer command right there, as well as sublayers and clipping masks, which we'll talk about another time. So I could create a new layer above that one. I could keep this one locked so I don't move my image backs in. I could draw on the one above it, and I can make as many layers as I want to separate stuff and organize it and lock any of those that I need to, or see specific things inside it. Now in this case, I'm just going to get rid of these for now, so I would have to unlock that layer. I always make it a habit to lock your other ones just so you don't accidentally delete something. Now the crux of how the Adobe Illustrator system works is it uses something called vector. Now we have a few familiar tools here. Selection tool selects overall objects, whereas the direct selection tool, or A, selects parts of an object, such as anchor points or handles, which we'll look at in a bit. We have this where you can freehand draw a selection to get just a few points, not the whole object. Now here, if you remember, anything with a little white triangle in the corner there has submenus inside it if you hold the mouse button down. So here I have the pen tool, the add anchor, delete anchor, and anchor tool point. Notice that these all have commands. Now you won't want to go into this menu each time, so I recommend getting used to hitting P for pen tool and just hit plus or minus if you want to add points or subtract points. Shift C will change the type of point it is, which I'll show you in a moment here. Now the way that vector works is you can click once, drag a point, you move your line where you want it to go. Next, you click. If you want a straight line, you just keep clicking. However, if you want to curve, you click and hold, and that will allow you to drag out a curve. Now you can edit this curve later, so it doesn't have to be perfect. Now, because I have a curve, it's going to want to continue the curve. You'll see this line is curving here, which I can do. But when it wants to continue the curve, if I instead of want to go straight, I can move it back over the point I just made, and you'll notice there's a little upside down V, like an upward facing caret. If I click one more time, that changes the type of point back to a straight point. I'll drag again here. You'll notice when I close that off, I got a little circle on the icon. Do that again here. When you're going over the last point to close a path, you get that little circle by your icon there, that little O. So what that means is you're about to make a closed object. Illustrator likes closed objects and wants things to be closed. If it's an open-ended object, it can confuse it a little bit. And so there's not many cases where we want to leave one half open. Now it's got what's called a stroke around it, where you have a line and you can change the width of that line. However, that line won't be in an area where it's not closed, so I would have to close it to get my full stroke on that. So we can change the fill color here by sliding this and then selecting a specific color in there. So general colors here and specific colors here. I can also choose a color for the outline. So same system, general colors here and the specific colors within that. Now you can click that to just jump back to black and white, and you can click this to flip those colors. You can click this to have no color. So if you want something that's transparent, like if I click that, click the fill, and click transparent, then I can drag objects behind it and they will actually show through it. So you can see this one is behind this one, but it's transparent in the middle now. Same thing here. If I move this over, it's opaque. However, if I make that invisible, you can see through it. So now only the stroke is showing up. So we use this to select whole objects, do things like move them. We can drag a selection like that to select multiple objects. So if I drag a selection, I get all of those at once. Let's say I wanted to group something. I could select all of these and hit Command G to group them, or go up to Object and group them there. And now I can move them as one unit. I don't have to click every one of them each time, and they can be ungrouped later. Now this selects individual points. So if you want to do something like select an anchor point, make sure nothing is selected first. When I move over this, it will show me that's an anchor point, and it will allow me to drag that. If it's something that has handles, like a curve, so the point is there, but it's still got this handle, I can edit this handle after the fact and adjust that curve. So notice, as I move it inwards or outwards, it changes the curve, and I have two handles I can do that with here. So let's say we have something like this. Now notice the handle moves as one. I can't move these individually. This is where the anchor point tool comes in handy. What this does is it changes the type of tool it is. So here this is a curve, and we can make that instead a straight point, kind of like over here. Now conversely, we can click on this and drag and turn this into a curve. So it changes the type of point from straight corners like that to curves. And also this will let me drag handles individually. So before, with the arrows, I can drag one handle and it will move both of them. But this will allow me to move the handles independently instead of both of them moving at once. So this can be useful for certain things. Alright, moving on. We have a curvature tool here, which you won't use for this. We have type, where we can set typography. There's a lot of options here, like you can do vertical type, etc. And you can have type follow a curve, like this. So if I were to click on here, you'll notice I get a little icon. Now it's going to put words all along that curve. Since this is a complex curve, those get a little confusing. I can change my font. Now this would work best in a simple scenario. So let's try a simple path here. So I will select my pen tool, or hit P for pen. I'll click once, click again, and drag out a simple curve. Now I don't want this curve to really be visible, so I can either make it invisible, or when I click on it with this type tool, it should turn invisible. Now if I double click it, we have a few options for it here. And we won't see those till I hit preview. And we can orient it. You can change things like spacing. When done, I hit OK. Now, when this is text, you can't edit individual points. So sometimes, if you're sure you have the text where you want it, you might want to convert it into outlines, like the rest of the Illustrator art. So I can select it with the black arrow there. I can go to Type, and I can change it to Create Outlines. So what this does is it actually makes the letters, instead of being editable text, they are now represented by points. So these are now all individual points that I can move instead of. Now at this point the text isn't really editable as far as text itself to retype it, but you can move the individual points. So only do that if you're fairly sure. You'll notice I'm going to a group within a group here, so I'm in compound path within a group within layer 1. I can step back through that. It's what's called nested. It's an object within an object within an object, and it will show me that up there. Okay. Now we have a line tool here, but you might as well just use the pen tool if you want to make straight lines. Just click, click, click anywhere you need a straight line. Make sure you're filling those. Now this is objects, so we have a whole bunch of stuff in here that we can use. Some of these, like a rounded rectangle, what you want to do is click, drag it out, and keep holding it. And while you're still holding the mouse button, you can hit things like arrow keys to change the amount of curve. So while I'm holding the mouse key down, I'm hitting the up and down arrow keys to change the curve. Usually there's also some options for the tool up here. Now if you're using something like the star tool, you can drag that out, and I'm hitting up or down to change the number of points. There should be. I'm going to change the orientation for that if you double click it. Now you can edit these as objects too. If you click off of it and go over a point. A polygon tool and a lens flare tool, which you probably will use. This will make circles. If you want to drag a circle from the corner, you just click and drag. If you want to drag it from the center instead of the corner, you hold Option and then click it. Now notice it will skew in certain directions, like squish in one direction, unless I hold Shift. Shift will keep it a perfect circle or a perfect square if you're using the rectangle here. So if I hold Shift, it will always be a perfect square. I'm going to get rid of that. Brush is useful to brush in certain shapes. You can change what it looks like up here. Now brushes are a little bit more complicated, so I might wait on this part until you know Illustrator well, and make sure I'm around in class. We have an eraser here. We have a shaper tool. So I'm not going to delve too much into this, but it's an advanced tool that takes objects and adds them together. So if you make a bunch of objects, you can use it to scribble out certain parts. And you use it to quickly fill or adjust shapes. By how you scribble. Now the tool I mentioned before, the Pathfinder, what this does is it combines or subtracts shapes, and we have a lot of options here. Now remember, if you hold your mouse over one, it will show you what it does. Now on this, if I were to take a rectangle and a circle or star, and they're overlapping, they're two distinct objects. Now if I either hold Shift to select one and add the other to the selection, or I drag a selection around both of them, I can then either combine them into an object, subtract one from the other, have an intersection where only the overlapping parts exist, or an exclusion, which in that case you won't see for that shape. We have some other options here too. And depending on the shapes, they won't all work. So what these are really doing, if I use the subtract command, is it's punching one thing out of another. So let's say that we make a circle, or let's say a star. And if we wanted to do something like Okay, if I hold Option, I can also control how flat it gets, like that. I can have flat top. And holding Command, Star Tool lets me change some of those things. I'm still holding the mouse button, by the way. Once I let go, it makes an object. Now let's go ahead and flip that. And we'll put a rounded tool in the center. Now we can't see that because they're the same color. I'm just seeing an outline preview. But if I select them, I can punch the second object out of the first. So now this is one solid object. I've actually punched that shape out of the star. There's some other things you can do with this. Once again, if you select two objects. Now you don't want to select multiple objects and hope it will punch them all out at the same time. Illustrator's not so great at that. It doesn't always know what to do. So we could do something like exclusion to take out the overlapping parts. We could leave just where they intersect. All sorts of options here. So that leaves just what's left after mousing back. Now if I add these together into one object, occasionally you will get something that doesn't work too well when you're trying to move it. If that's the case, try expanding it. Go to Object, Expand. Now, sometimes it will ask you if you want to expand the stroke. You probably don't want to do that. That will make it more confusing. I would stick to simple shapes for now. So let's say we wanted to make something like a circle with wings. We could take the ellipse tool, hold Shift to get a perfect circle that's filled with black. Now if we wanted to have a little space between this and the wing, there's several ways we could do it. We could make this have a white outline around it. Now we can't really see that outline there, but we can make it larger. The reason for doing this is if we start drawing a wing here, it will keep a perfect white circle so it looks like they're separate objects. So what I mean is if I deselect that and make a black filled object, now if I put it backwards behind this object, and I can do that by holding Command and hitting the square bracket. Now it still exists, that's not gone, it's just behind the white line around this object, because you can see this has a white edge, right? I just made that larger. We can see I'm actually shrinking it there. Now this is a fake of having this shape perfectly fit this one. It's not actually cut away. Now there is a way to do that. If we want to turn this stroke here into a filled shape, we could go to Object, Path, Outline Stroke. What it does is instead of having a line represent that stroke, it actually outlines it. So we could take that stroke, and we could try and cut it out from this, but that's a little bit more complicated. It's probably better to fake this, and at the end just select all of it and hit Command G to group it so the parts don't move independently. One thing we could do is use A to try and select just the line. We could copy it and paste it with Command F and hold Shift to select this too. We could try to cut those out. Now because that shape is behind this, it might be a little bit difficult to select. So you'll notice it actually cut that shape out now. I've gone to the group within the group within the layer, so I can delete that. And I go back, and we have an actual cutout of that now instead of it just being a fake with the line there. Okay, now if I have something like this, I want to make sure I'm not selecting this too. So I'll double click this till I have just this object. Now I can reflect it across an axis. So let's say we select that and go to Object and Transform. We can reflect it. Now you can either reflect it from top to bottom or from side to side. So I want to go vertical. I'll hit Preview so I can see what it does. You'll notice it made a perfect mirror image of that. Now I didn't copy and paste it, so I'm going to make the copy right here. Now if I hold shift while I move this, it will stay straight with the other one. It won't move up or down. Okay, now I can move back. Now if I were to try and move this right now, let's see, if I were to try and move this right now, I might accidentally move just part of it. So that's why it's best to select everything and then hit Command G to make it a group, and then it all moves easily as one. Now it's hard to select an individual part of this now, but if I just keep double clicking it, I can go into parts within parts. You'll see that up here. Alright, I could hit Command S to save this, and I want to save an editable version of this, so anything saved as .ai is an Illustrator file, meaning it's vector format. Now, Vector does support transparency. You could put this in Photoshop. In fact, we could even select the object, and we can drag and drop it right into a Photoshop document. Let's open Photoshop here. Okay, let's say we're going to put it on this. So what I could do is go to my Illustrator document. It kind of helps to grab the edge here where you get that little arrow and actually slide everything over if we can. Try and get where you can see the edge a little bit. And we can drag it right onto that Photoshop document. And let go. It'll take a second, but it should put a copy of that somewhere. Now this is what is called a vector smart object. So you'll see that right there. It's a special type of layer. Now you can't brush on it or anything because it's not rasterized. It is possible to rasterize it so you can paint on it by choosing rasterized layer, but you probably don't want to do that. So if I hit Command T for transform, it will give me these options here to pull it from any corner. Corner will change width and height at once. This will just change it in one direction if I do those. So I want to change both at once. I want to hold shift so it doesn't stretch any dimension. When I've got it where I want it, I can hit enter. Now since it's on its own layer here, I can change the opacity and the blending mode to fade it out a little bit. You can do things like darken or multiply, so it shows the image beneath it. Now you could do this on a case-by-case basis and drop some form of your image here. As long as it supports transparency in the background, it'll show through along the edges here. You could do that in each document in Photoshop, but that's pretty time-consuming. So if we go to Lightroom, now many of you by this point have probably put a watermark on your photo. But when you go to export, you would select all the photos you want to export, just as you usually do. Now you'll notice at the very bottom we have watermarking. I'm going to check that on. Now I have some presets I've made, but you can go to Edit Watermarks. Now this will show you a preview. You'll see a tiny watermark there, but you can choose an image. So if you check that to Graphic, you can change it to the image you have made. You just find it there and choose. Now I have some presets I've set up. That one's got my name in gold. There's a simple one there with a copyright. There's a small signature there. Now as you change things over here, if you already have a preset, you can save all these settings over the preset. So it updates the preset with these settings by clicking Save Current Settings as New Preset. You can restore the defaults, you can delete a preset, or you can rename a preset. So if I select this one here, I can change anything I need to over here. Then I want to make sure I save it as current preset, so it saves over it. That way I won't have to change it each time. You can affect the opacity, you can affect the size, you can set the inset, which is the space between the edge on the bottom and side of the picture. You can change which area it is, upper left corner, left middle, etc. You will most likely be putting this in the lower corner, either the right or the left, and you can see how inset changes it. Now this will automatically send out any photo that you use this export setting on. Say you select 100 photos in Lightroom here, and then hit export, and you go ahead, set this up. Now you can save this over the preset here. We would want to name it. In this case, I'm not actually changing mine. Now when you hit export here, if that's checked and you have selected the type you want, then what it's going to do is put that watermark on every single one of those automatically. Okay. So in this case, I'll hit cancel since I don't need to do that. Now you won't see it here. It happens when you export it. Okay, back to Illustrator. That should get you most of what you need there. Just make sure once again that if you export it and you don't drag and drop it from here into Photoshop, if you do export, just make sure you save it as something like a PNG that supports transparency. So if I put something like a logo 5 for a name, and I save that right into downloads or documents. Now there's the resolution. Since it's changing to a raster image now, it's not math or vector anymore. Now it's a pixel file, kind of like a JPEG, right? PNG. So I'll go ahead and save that as high so it's got good print quality. Notice there it gave me the option to make sure the background is transparent, so we do want to have that. You'll see right there, I want to make sure I keep that transparent. You won't have that option if it's a JPEG, only PNG, TIFF, or Photoshop. Okay, now back in Lightroom, if I had chosen export and I'd gone down here to watermark and edited and hit graphic and then chosen a symbol, so I put that one. Now you can click this to organize by date modified. So there's my logo. Now the image is there, it's just a little bit hard to see. So we'll change the size. Now notice the opacity is already down 46%, so you can see through it. So you want to put it in a corner, anchor it wherever you want it. You can rotate it, etc. When you hit save, it would make you have a new preset. In this case, I don't actually want to do that. But then when you export it, it would put that on all your photos using PNG. So it can be done individually in Photoshop by making a new layer each time and putting that image on that new layer with transparency in the background so your photo shows through and save it that way. But the easier way is probably just to make it a preset in Lightroom and export it with that watermark. Now in Photoshop, there's lots of ways to make a watermark. I'll delete this layer here so we can see what it would look like if you hadn't had that. I have a huge saturation adjustment here. You'll probably have multiple layers. Now if I'm using one of the Wacom tablets, I can use a paintbrush and paint my name even with pressure sensitivity here. So we have our overall brush size. This is how hard the edges are, so if you take that down to 0, it'll be soft like an airbrush, and if you turn that up, it'll be more like a pen, where the edges aren't softer. You can also change the size by hitting the square brackets, which are to the left and right below the delete key. Okay, so you can kind of see. Now I have my cursor set in my preferences to show the brush size. So you'll notice as I hit the square bracket, I can see how big my brush size is or how small. Okay, now I would make a new layer if I wanted to assign it directly here. If it's dark, I could try painting something like white. Now I'm just using my mouse or the trackpad on my laptop, so it won't look too good. But I can change the type of layer to something like a lightener screen. Take the opacity down a little bit. Different types of layers will react differently with the picture behind it. Sometimes overlay is a good choice too. You can kind of see through it, see it's a lighter color. Now I have two options. If I were to save this as a simple file and I knew I wouldn't need to move this later, I could squish all these layers together by doing flatten image. Now our layer options are up here. So if I go into there, there is an option to flatten image, so it all becomes one flat layer, but then it's not editable. You could do that if it's where you know you want it and you're confident with saving it that way. But I'm going to undo here. Now remember, in Photoshop, if you need to undo, you should go up to Window and open this History palette. This will show you every action you've taken since the last time you saved or opened the document. So this is very helpful to have here. Here we can see opened it. We can go back in time by clicking on one of these. Now don't click here because that uses a history brush. It doesn't actually change anything. You want to click on the layer itself to go back in time. Now as soon as you save this document, this will reset, so you won't have the option to go back through these. So make sure you make changes you need that you won't have to undo before you save the document. Okay. Now you can either export this as something like a PNG that supports transparency, or you can go to export as. Now, if it's over your image, you don't need to have transparency. It's only if you're saving the name itself. So let's say we wanted to make a file that we could reuse on multiple documents. I could go to File, New. I could once again make something that was a little bit wider, for instance, the signature. So I'll change this to inches. Say 3 by 1.5 again. Probably going to have that resolution a little higher, like 240 to 300. Okay, I'll hit Command 0 to resize that to my window. Now, if I were to paint with a brush here, I'll just use my mouse trackpad again. So let's say we wanted to have a darker signature. Now I want to have this background transparent. So here's the problem. Because I painted on white here on the background layer, even if I save it as something with transparency, so notice I have transparency marked, but what I really needed to do here was make a layer above the background layer. Now if you zoom in there, you can see that's actually got a tiny grid. Let's see if I can zoom in. I guess it won't let me, but there's a tiny transparency grid. So if I had just the black and white image, let's say this layer didn't exist yet, if I had just black and white image, I would actually have to find a way to delete the white behind it here if I want transparency. So I could try doing something like select color range, clicking in the white area, and hitting delete. Now I see that transparency grid behind it. Now if you know select and mask and all the other things, you can refine the edge of that selection, because notice it's a little bit fuzzy there. Sometimes it will trap some white you don't want, so make sure you're using select and mask. See, if I step back one step here to when it was a selection, if I want to select and mask, I can actually contract that edge just a little bit. Here we can see it better. You can also soften the edge. Let's see what happens now. I actually need to switch this selection if I'm going to use select and mask. I need it to be the opposite, where this is selected and the background is not. So here's how that works. I'm going to switch it back once. If you have the background selected and not the foreground, then you're actually going to want to think in reverse because this is not selected. Now, if I switch that, that would be how you just delete the background. Now, if I select these themselves, the letters themselves, now if I use select a mask, it's going to work a little bit differently. Now we're really going to see it when I start shifting that edge. We turn up the contrast, help it define the edge a bit more. You can see it softening here. Figure out how soft you really want that edge. And notice it's contracted the edge using shift. Now we can get some of the white out of that edge. Okay. Now we could either invert the selection again and delete it, or if I step back, now that we have our text selected, and invert again, so now the text is selected. Now if I hit that layer mask option, it's going to block out, using this black and white layer, everything except for the type, so the background won't show through, it'll look transparent. Now if that's the case, we don't even need this layer. So what we're doing, we didn't actually delete the background, we just have it blocked out with black using this layer mask. Okay, now this I could save as something that supports transparency. You could try quick export as PNG, but I like controlling my settings, so I'll do export as PNG. Make sure transparency is supported. If you need to scale it by, say, 50% because you think it's too large, you could do that right here. Now, I know 3 inches by 1.5 is probably too much, so let's try 50% there. It's going to tell me how many pixels that is. You have some options right there in that arrow too. It's going to show us canvas size. You can click on any of these to change that. You can put your copyright and contact info. I would recommend at this point converting that to sRGB, which is the color profile that's useful on the most devices. And it's not as important as the picture is with the color profile. So I'll hit export all. It'll have me name it and tell me where it's saving it. You could put it in a new folder. So now you could save this as an image, and you could also go back into Lightroom, back to your watermark presets, and choose an image and import this one instead with your signature. And as long as it supports transparency, you can put it in the corner or anchor it wherever you want and control the opacity right in Lightroom. And then that way, every time you export with that preset you made, using this image of your signature, you'll get the same type of watermark effect. Let's go ahead and give that a shot. We'll name this logo 5 again on the desktop. So if I go into Lightroom and I start editing my watermarks, I'm going to choose the one I already made. Let's cancel this real quick. And we'll choose graphic. We'll choose our image. So this time I put it in desktop. Okay. You can see we've got my signature there. Now it's best to make a light version and dark version. So a light version can go over top of light or dark stuff, and a dark version can go over top of light stuff. So if this were up here, it would look great. But down here, we'd want to do a version of that in white too. Now, of course, we can fade it out. Let's put it up there just so we can see it better. We can fade out using that opacity, how light it's going to be. where it is, how far it's inset, all that stuff. Okay, now you could notice this is edited. So we could save this as a new preset. Let's say logo example. Now I don't need to go through all this next time. All I need to do when I'm exporting pictures, I'll select all of them. Then when I go to export, I'll make sure watermark is checked, and we'll set that to logo example, and I don't have to go in and edit it. It's going to automatically export everything that's selected with that watermark wherever I put it and all those settings it shows.